What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of The Real Ones. Today, I'm joined by none other than Louis Harding, CEO of Betterhomes.
Hey.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's so funny because I was here almost 365 days ago with Rick Wayne.
Yeah.
And now there is a successor to the empire that is Betterhomes. So
Hopefully this will be more interesting than a fireside chat with Rick as well.
you guys are so different. You don't do high rocks. Wait, you both do high rocks.
We both did it. Yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, Rick did it.
You both worked at Foxtons at one point.
Yeah, we're very different characters.
Of
and
course.
I think people assume that Rick and I are really good mates and
Okay.
we've been in touch for years and years.
But you're enemies.
When in reality, actually, we worked together at Foxtons for, I don't know, probably 10, 12 years. There was an overlap, something like that.
Right.
He left, went to a different business in the UK for a few years, came over here, and we weren't in touch that whole time, really. Everyone has those sort of Instagram, LinkedIn pals that you comment on. That was pretty much it.
Oh, wow.
And then he reached out, when was it? Sort of early summer 23, something like that.
Okay. It was like planned that you were going to
No.
come in. Oh, okay. Cool.
No, of course not. No, I'd
Yeah.
never considered really coming to work in Dubai.
How do you
to be
feel
honest.
now? Because it's not a small responsibility, obviously. And from last time I spoke to you guys, I think you had about 800 people on the team.
Yeah.
I think it must be...
It's about 800-900 people across the entire Sencorp group.
Yeah.
Betterhomes is about 350, 375, something like that.
Got it. It's a huge responsibility.
I'm being a bit flippant in my response. Although we weren't planning and considering really Dubai or the Middle East as a whole, I definitely reached a point in my career where I fancied a change. I had done over 20 years in London. My wife's a Kiwi. She was hassling me because she wanted to live by the beach. And it's weird how life pans out, right? We had a long trip a few months before to New Zealand. And I met with some real estate firms in New Zealand because we always assumed we'd end up either in Auckland or Sydney.
Wow.
And New Zealand's amazing, but there's not a huge amount going on there. So from an opportunity perspective, but we came back and our mind was very much in the mindset of let's make a change. Let's do it before the kids get too old. And then Rick reached out. Although I'm being flippant saying that we weren't thinking about Dubai, he was definitely pushing on an open door because mentally we're sort of already in that place.
It's so interesting. New Zealand, I don't know how similar to Sydney and Melbourne it is. And I was down there last year. I was just like, how are people so chill here? And everyone's super content and happy with their lives. Like they love everyone and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm so used to like being between Dubai, London, New York, where it's everyone's like kill.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the thing. So that was
it's
strange.
The market
No.
is so different. It's a broker model, very similar to here. So the brokers earn between sort of 50 and 80%. The managers of the offices or most offices at businesses are paid on a profit basis on the branch that they run. But the competition is so thin compared to here. So I met with a firm called Barfoot and Thompson. They are, I think, New Zealand's oldest real estate firm. Third generation, family run still. It's not a franchise. And we're part of the same affiliation. So I reached out to Peter Thompson, who is a managing director, but it was his grandfather, I think, that founded the business. And I went and saw him in Auckland and we were just chatting generally, right? It was just a sort of meet and greet, but sounds really boring, but we got into a conversation about market share and his market share is over 40%.
Wow.
And it's one of those things where he said it. I said, sorry, did you say over 40%? And he said, yeah, they sell almost 1 in 2 properties across Auckland. So you then go away, and I couldn't get my head around the number, knowing our market share numbers. You then go online, and there's probably sort of 10, 12 quite significant real estate brokerages, right? And then there's a few one-man bands, but the numbers are really small. I probably got the numbers wrong, but the numbers are really small.
Yeah.
And you then look at Dubai, where I think the latest DLD stats are that there's over 6,000 brokerages.
Yeah, I
just
think
businesses.
it's about 6,400 because that's my TAM right
It's
there.
mental.
Yeah.
So it's amazing the difference between the two, but I didn't really see it as a sort of really good potential because it's not particularly a thriving real estate market. New Zealand, unlike here, has a pretty stagnant population like most of the world does at the moment.
Yeah.
At the time, Jacinda was in charge and they weren't particularly open gates to the rest of the world. And you look at it and think, I'm not quite sure where the opportunity is going to come from. They don't have a housing shortage like the UK or Sydney. And then, as I say, Rick and I had been in touch intermittently over the years, and then he reached out to me. So we were there mentally, and it was actually Dubai that was the surprise part.
And I'll come back to this whole point on the large brokerages versus the little guys thing. But usually when we start off the podcast, we ask our guests what they wanted to be when they were 7 years old. So what did you want to do?
I wanted to be a footballer.
Oh, of course. Are you any good?
Nope. Everyone's had trials, which is an English saying for every bloke growing up who basically convinces everyone down the pub that you used to be great at football. Fine. And I was all right, but no, Christ, I was never going to become a professional, that's for sure.
What team do you support?
I'm a Southampton fan, but I'm a closet Liverpool fan as well.
All right.
I was born in 1980, so I grew up in the 80s, and Liverpool were just the team of the 80s. They were just unbelievable.
I think I know, like, I used to trade match attacks, I think.
Yeah.
So I know there's 3 people in all of football that I probably know because I don't watch any sport, but Fernando Torres.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a Steven Gerrard.
Yeah.
And those are the 2 from
both Liverpool.
Yeah, that I know.
Yeah.
And the other one's obviously CR7.
Yeah. Gerrard's probably the greatest midfielder of the Premier League era, I would have thought. Lots of people argue with me, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to get the most heat in this entire
Probably
podcast.
that's it. Yeah, it's probably that's
it.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Look, obviously, now that was what you wanted to be. And tell me about the journey. I know you had about a couple of decades in London real estate, but talk about the first gig that you ever had all the way through to here now as CEO of one of the biggest and the oldest brokerage in the country.
Yeah, so I totally fell into real estate, which in my experience back home is not unusual. I don't think there's many people that sort of dream of getting into a estate agency. And I went to university, had a couple of marketing jobs after uni, and I was living in Southampton, but my girlfriend at the time was in London, and I went to do an interview at Foxtons. Okay. And Foxtons used to do these big group interviews. So they'd have 20, 30 people in a room at a time. What? They'd give everyone a beer, and there'd be people from the business circulating around the room. And then you'd get pulled out to have a quick one-on-one interview with an area director.
That's so cool.
And I found it quite interesting. I found the sort of whole concept of the group interview a bit weird, a bit awkward. And then we got onto the package. And the package back then, I guess, was the sort of nearest equivalent to Dubai, where it was the lowest salary in the industry, 10 grand. And back then there was no minimum wages, so you could pay pretty low. And commission was 10 to 20%.
Wait, 10 grand a year?
Yeah. 10 grand base salary.
Pounds.
And then commission 10 to 20%.
What?
So we scored it 10 and 10. You're on 10 and 10, basically.
Right.
And 10% commission doesn't sound very interesting here, but again, it was way above the market norm. Right. And I was up to here in debt. And as soon as they said 10 and 10, I knew what my rent was going to be in London. I was like, no chance. And I left. They called me the next day. I think I might have ignored the call. I don't remember. Anyway, I didn't accept the job. I then ironically had a 2-week trip to Saudi.
Wow.
And it was
this
just
when
This was early 2003.
Okay, wow.
So it was around the time of the second Gulf War, and I had 2 weeks in Saudi. I was in Jeddah, Riyadh, and Al Khabar, and it wasn't a particularly enjoyable trip. Let's put it that way. And I was a kid. I was 23. And then I landed on the plane back to Heathrow, glad to be back home. And I had a message from the area director saying, still chasing you up, basically. And that was that moment of, screw it, why not? No. So I accepted the job, moved to London on the Sunday, started at Chiswick Park, where you went recently, on the Monday for my week's induction training. Yeah.
There's a new katsu place there, by the way. It's great.
And just, what's that, 22 years ago.
Wow. And then you did Struts after.
Yeah, so Foxtons, I moved through the ranks quite quickly. No. I knew immediately that I was going to love real estate, I think within the first week.
What was that? What made you think that?
I think a couple of things. I think, although I don't sound it, and although everyone in Dubai real estate thinks I'm some toff, I'm not. I grew up on council estates back in the UK. I come from a single parent family. I'm one of 5 boys. So what I loved about real estate, particularly at a company like Foxtons, was that it was a genuine meritocracy. People weren't interested in whether I went to the right school, whether my dad knew the right person. There wasn't that nepotism. And I just got a kick out of the fact that I could earn 2, 3, 4 times more than the guy opposite me just by working harder, being more disciplined. And it was, for me, just a great equalizer, because up to that point, and some will say I still have it now, but certainly up to that point, I had a massive chip on my shoulder. I thought the world owed me something and was probably quite self-destructive. And suddenly I was in that environment where I had to succeed because I couldn't live on 10 grand.
Yeah.
But they also gave me all the tools to do the job. And I'm naturally very competitive. It doesn't matter what the prize is. If it's a Mars bar, I want to try and win it. And my area director was great. A guy called Giles Kirk, he really believed in me. He gave me opportunities way before I was ready. I was running one of their largest offices within about 14, 15 months, which I loved. Looking back now, I wasn't ready.
Right.
That first year, I was just super aggressive, worked harder than anyone else and managed just to get through it, and then built up the skills over the preceding years. And then when I left there nearly 15 years later, I was area director for the biggest region in the business.
Wow, that's huge. And like, how do you kind of reconcile the two, right? Because you've had this very humble beginning and now you live in Dubai and you're raising your kids in Dubai, right? How do you, I know how my parents have tried to ground me a little bit in the fact that like what their reality was versus what mine is today. How do you do that?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately a bit of the, you don't know how lucky you are, Dad. And we're going to get deep now.
Let's go.
Joel. But also part of it is an understanding. So a therapist once gave me some really good advice. Yeah. They said, whenever you're in conflict with one of your sons, remember that it's you as a 45-year-old man. It's Logan, who's my oldest son, as a 10-year-old. But it's also you as a 10-year-old. There's always 3 people in that conflict. There's never just 2, because I naturally, when I get frustrated with him for being a bit of a brat, or the big one for me is if he ever comes across as ungrateful, I always picture what I didn't have when I was 10, which then manifests in me getting really pissed off with him. So I always try to remember that. I don't always remember it, to be clear. No. And I make loads of mistakes as a dad, I'm sure I do. But it's getting that balance, because they don't care, frankly. No. They don't give a shit. They don't care about what your upbringing was like. They might do when they're older, but they certainly don't now. No. They didn't ask to be born. They didn't ask to move to Dubai and have the life that they have now. And we're very fortunate with the life that we have. But I'm also grateful that I did it at the age that I did. I moved here when I was 43. Yeah. So I'm not here for the brunches or being able to buy 15 Rolexes. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I like cars, but I'm not going to drive around in a ridiculously ostentatious car, because for me, I probably would have tried to do that 10, 15 years ago. But I'm glad I've come here at an age that I have, because I think I'm a bit more measured about it. And also I'm quite clear that I'm going to work really hard and ride this train for as long as I can, to then actually go and live a really simple life, probably in New Zealand, where I'll drive a 20-year-old Subaru and ride my bike every day. That's actually the destination for me. Yeah. And I also think that kids, although they'll go through phases where they might be a bit ungrateful and might be brats, and frankly, you might look at them and think, you're a twat. I do also think, though, that they come out the other end and they're always going to be ultimately a reflection of their parents. Yeah. Once they get to an age where they're mature, I think that's always going to be the biggest impact on them. But it is challenging. But our weekends are, we live in Jumeirah too. We're 2 roads from the beach.
Cycling.
We're just like on our bikes, right? We're on the beach and cruising around and trying to do normal stuff. We're not. I
swear I'm not a stalker, guys. I just follow his stories very closely. I just realized I said that out loud and I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, we're not out doing flash stuff. There's only so much you can do as well.
Yeah, look, for what it's worth, having grown up here and being surrounded by pretty much, now it's 10x what it used to be, but all the Lambos, etc. I think it makes you immune to people that have money. Yeah. It's like you have money and what? Yeah. I think that's the attitude as you grow and mature. I think it starts off being like, oh, he has a PSP, I want a PSP. And then it eventually goes into, you have that, but what else do you have?
Yeah. It's also just trying to find that balance throughout the year, right? I'm not close to my family. I don't speak to my family. My wife's a Kiwi, so we don't have that draw to go back to the UK every year like lots of people do.
Yeah.
So for us, the summer is going to Sri Lanka, renting a villa, driving a scooter for 2 or 3 weeks in skanky shorts and t-shirt and just going for lunches on the beach shack. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's also about exposing them to, frankly, the reality of the world out there. But also, I think whenever you make decisions around whether it's work or where you want to live, it's also thinking about what's the alternative. And I love the UK. I'm a proud Brit, but it's not in good shape at the moment. And yes, here they'll be sheltered, probably not very streetwise.
Yeah.
There will be times probably when they're a brat because they just can't quite get their head around the realities of what normal is. But then the alternative back home is, it feels like the alternative back home is either pay for a really expensive private education or they join a gang.
No,
It's kind of like they seem to be the two
that's
options.
insane. But it is what I've heard across literally everyone across the spectrum. Like, the people that have the multi-million-dollar houses and even the folks that just live in humble neighborhoods, and they all feel the same way that you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's very, to your point about this person that's on the beach in Sri Lanka, right? Like, how do you bring that person to work in the context that a lot of your team looks up to you and they don't necessarily have that insight into your life kind of a thing or know that much about you? How do you embed that culture in them that whilst this is all great, but do you try to coach them as humans?
I guess I try to the best I can, but I also try to be realistic about what I would have been like in my 20s if I was living in Dubai earning some of the money that these guys are earning.
Yeah, I remember you called me out for that one. We met for the first time and he was like, Joel, you picked the most pretentious cafe. Love.
It was like 20 quid for a coffee. It's like, Jesus.
I'm coming with the MD of Betterhomes at the time, so I was like, I'm going to do it.
So yeah, I guess I do to a certain degree, but also I remind myself that, as I say, if I was in my 20s here earning that kind of money, then I would have been a bit of a douche at times, frankly. And it's also getting that balance between go out and enjoy the spoils of the hard work, because they work really bloody hard and it is high risk, high reward. Yeah. But then with some of them also try and plant some seeds around not putting too much value on probably some of the stuff that they do put a lot of value on. And there is a significant difference here around the way real estate agents portray themselves, particularly online, compared to the UK. And that's been a really big learning curve for me, because the best operators in prime central London, you would have no idea. They drive around on little Vespers, scooters. They don't really have Instagram accounts. They're totally under the radar. You'd have no idea really who was billing several million or who was billing next to nothing. There's a few high profile ones. We both know Daniel Daggers. Yeah. But it's not really about, look what I've got. It's not really about lifestyle and wealth and all of that sort of stuff. No. Where obviously that is a much bigger thing here. But I also, and we talk about it a lot at work, it's having a brand and having your own personal profile is really important. And I think it's going to become even more important. And I think big brands, big international brands, I think will probably become less important. I think it's going to be more about the individual. But something we talk about a lot at work is always try and remember who it is you're posting it for. And I think a lot of the stuff that goes on socials, it's to impress other people within the industry, as opposed to actually focusing on trying to get another client. And it should obviously be the latter.
So you said focus on personal brand, and the big international brands need to think about that. You're a big international brand. How are you making your teams think about personal brand?
Yeah, I think what's different here though, and I guess I'm thinking about more structured industries like the UK, is that we're a big brand, but brokers still get a lot of flexibility and they still take a significant slice of the pie. They take a bigger slice of the commission pie than we do once we paid all of our costs. So I think finding that balance here is less challenging. I think businesses back home in the UK have a real challenge around it.
Yeah, I know
because
a lot of the estate agencies that even struggle to give them an Instagram account.
Correct.
For the company, let alone.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. If you have a business company structure where you expect people in at 8 o'clock in the morning and they're chained to their desk till 6 o'clock at night, and fine, they have a comfort of a salary, but the variable pay, the commission is relatively small.
Yeah.
And the new generation coming through have grown up with a phone and Instagram, and they're aware of the nomad way of working and the flexibility and that autonomy to work the way they want to work. That's sort of square peg round hole. It's really difficult how they're going to make those two things match. And I think that's where they have the biggest challenges. I think less so here, because I think, and this sounds like a pitch and I don't mean it to, but I think good brokers here can get the best of both worlds, where they can benefit from the structure, the support, the contacts, the tech, the innovation, the brand of a business like ours, but they can also still have the flexibility, and they can still take a massive percentage of the total commission home with kind of none of the risk, really. And yeah, there are lots of successful brokers that have gone on to create their own real estate firms and be very successful and make lots of money, but there's also lots that have failed. So I think here there's actually a really nice balance where they can almost get the best of both worlds, and that's where you're seeing a real eruption of that in the UK with Daniel Daggers and CBRE. EXP are really starting to gain market share as well. Yeah. So I think it's going to be really interesting how that plays out.
1,000 something agents now. It's
a lot.
What is going on?
Yeah, there's a lot.
But very interesting. So look, we know that personal brand is the future. We also know my favorite topic, technology, or as you like to say, agentic AI. Shout out, Sylvia. Tell me how you're actually looking at technology, right? What is the practical use case of everything that's going on with OpenAI and the massive technology companies in San Francisco that are basically like sweeping this technology onto our little landscapes, and then we basically need to decide what to do with it. What do you think a Betterhomes / the real estate industry out here is doing and also where should they be going with that?
So AI is one of those things that scares me and excites me in equal measure. And it's also one of those things where you can really feel the need for the urgency and that ability to gain first mover advantage. And there's probably 2 or 3 areas where we're looking at it. Firstly is about improving the amount of wastage that there is in our business. Coming from the UK, which is a pretty depressed market and hasn't really been a good market for some time. We had a post-COVID bounce for a year. Previous to that, 2014. It's a long time ago. PCL, Prime Central London, is still about 20% down prices of 2014. So the business there was all about trying to generate some leads, but culturally, it was all about proactive outbound calls, piling through your database to try and to create some opportunities to invigorate people when the motivation wasn't there to try and get them to buy. The culture here is really different. And that's because we are in a bull market. We're 4 or 5 years now into an upward cycle. How much longer that's going to last is obviously a hot topic at the moment. And we spend a lot of money. So as a business, we generate between 12,500 and 15,000 inbound leads every single month. That is a gigantic number. And it means that the waste is just eye-watering. It's an eye-watering amount of waste. And also it means that because brokers are so used to inbound, I think some of them have lost the ability to overcome objections. I think they've lost some of that resilience of hearing no 5, 6, 7 times before actually giving up. And I don't blame them. I'm not digging them out, because if I get a lead and it's not an instant gratification, then I've got another lead and then another lead. I can understand why I wouldn't see that first one to the end of the journey. And that's where AI can come in. That's where AI can retarget and reheat all of those leads, many of which I think are really good. We spend a huge amount of money on the portals. And circa 70% of all the leads that we generate through the portals and that we've paid for, again, we've already got. they're already existing on our database. So there's a real need there to reheat and retarget all of those leads. And as agentic AI improves, I can see a time where actually we get to a point where the broker steps in when the lead is qualified. We know their financial position. We know their proceedability. And actually, they just want to physically come out and view some properties. And I can see a time when actually that's when the brokers will get involved. I'd expect them then to pick up the relationship from there on in, because once you've interacted with someone physically, you're not going to want to go back to the AI way of communicating. So I can see huge improvements up to that stage. And certainly our CRM database, the qualification's not good. The basic information on there is really basic. So I think the quality of the work that they'll do also will be significant. The other side on it as well is more around the sort of consumer and client side, and how people search for properties and their ability to engage with AI that is so slick and so on point that it sounds like you're dealing with someone who will then be able to scrape information through all property sources, but not just Property Finder, Badal, Instagram stories, and whatever else it may be. I think there'll be a lot of progress around how people search, which again will be interesting to see what the future of the portals look like as well. A bit like what the future of Google looks like in terms of how people now are searching to get their data.
Have you used Perplexity by any chance?
No.
It's like this new tool that's kicking on Google as well. Provides like multiple different sort of citations for different search, just like that. Instead of you having to go through the promoted piece of all of the ads driven things, because Google doesn't charge a subscription, whereas Perplexity does in a way. So it's like, what is the future of paid search kind of a thing? And I think I saw this on Rick's story today where he was posting about, he probably asked ChatGPT or something, what are the top brokerages in the UAE? And I think it was Betterhomes and a couple of other names in there. And that is actually search based on an existing sort of database that the AI has been trained on. So if that is search in a way today, how do you push yourself as a smaller agency and a brand? So that was like the broader discussion that it was on, which is if a market like Singapore and which was I think the UK or something.
The reference to Singapore
and the US.
Sorry, and the fact I think there was maybe 15 brokerages that dominate the market, and one brokerage has I think 12,000 agents. I think it said.
Exactly. So something along those lines, but effectively saying that the big brokerages control a large amount of the market share. What is the future for the little guy? Now, I can easily ask you what's the future for a big brand piece, but if you were in the shoes of the little guy, what would you do?
Firstly, I think a bit of consolidation in Dubai real estate, I think will probably be a good thing. I don't welcome it, but I also don't worry about the market slowing or the market softening a little bit, because I think any slowdown or softening of the market will be counterbalanced by a consolidation of people operating in the marketplace. Dubai doesn't need the amount of brokerages and brokers that it has for its current transaction numbers. That might change, but we all know the numbers, over 20,000 registered brokers. So the amount of brokers that are operating, we can probably all hazard a guess on what that might look like. And we all know the transaction numbers, which means that although there are lots of brokers that are doing very well, you just need to go on Instagram to work out who they are. Just looking at the numbers divided by the number of people operating, transaction numbers divided by the number of people operating, it means there are lots of people that aren't doing any business at all or are doing very little. So I don't think consolidation in the marketplace is a bad thing. Selfishly, from my perspective, but I probably also talk for some of the other established brands as well, the businesses that do things the right way typically only gain market share during uncertain times rather than good times. Because when the tide is high and anyone can sell, the fact that you invest in great training, you invest in recruitment, you invest in tech and innovation, and you invest in your brand and the customer journey and all those sorts of things, people don't really care. Because the market's amazing and it's like, mate, I don't need those things. I just need the listing, I need a phone, and I need some people to call and I'll get it sold. And it was the same in the UK. when we're at Foxtons, we never gained market share in 2005, 6, 7 when the market was amazing. We gained market share during the global financial crisis. So selfishly, I quite welcome it. But there's always going to be a place for smaller firms. Of course there is. There is in any real estate market. But they have to provide a real value add. And that typically comes down to the person at the helm, whoever's running it, because it's a reflection of their DNA and the way they want to operate. And it's typically because they are absolutely ingrained within the community that they work. When I think about the smaller firms that I've come across over the years who have provided really difficult competition, despite the fact I might have a bigger army behind me, it's because they are just ingrained in the local community. They live there, they work there, their kids go to school in the local area. They understand what makes those areas tick. And they have that sort of local, really delicate understanding of the market, more so than a bigger firm could ever do. So I think there is a place for them, and I want there to be a place for them, but they have to provide that level of service maybe that perhaps a bigger firm will struggle to do. But it always comes down to the people, the individual.
That's a very interesting insight. I didn't think that was, I never thought about it as the central figure's DNA going into and I do see this community piece that you talk about in the UK quite a lot as well.
Yeah.
There's this area expertise thing that just is so common, whereas out here, someone who's selling JVC is selling like Wadi Al Safa. Like it just depends on what's hot and who wants to buy where versus what you actually know.
But that's also going to become more important as the market changes, right?
Yeah.
So we've just done our Q1 report, and you can see that there's quite a significant shift in the percentage of end users as a result of that, a percentage of mortgage buyers, because they typically go hand in terms of the numbers going up. And I also think that is just a further reflection of the maturity of the Dubai real estate market, frankly. And that's also a really good thing for stability and robustness for when the market does inevitably slow, whenever that is. Because the danger of having a really highly investor-led property market is that the moment there is a bit of a downturn, if I'm an investor and I've got, 10, 15 assets across the city, I might be getting a great return on the rental, but I feel quite exposed. I've made a lot of money over the last 5 years. The chances are is I'm going to want to dispose of some or all of those assets, which then increases supply at a time when demand is dropping. If you have more of an end user market, which we can now start to see in Dubai is really gathering pace, that gives it more stability, because when there's a slowdown in the market, those people won't do anything because they live in the property that they own and they'll just see it out. They're more likely just to sit tight, which hopefully will help reduce supply. It's exactly what happened in 2008, 2009 in London. I bought my first flat in Tooting, southwest London.
Yep.
I had my offer accepted December 2007, which was absolute top of the market. I completed January the 31st, 2008, my birthday. I think 3 months later, there was a run on Northern Rock. 3 months after that, it was worth less than what I paid for it.
Wow.
3 months after that, it was worth less than what my mortgage was on it, which is called negative equity. And yeah, it was a kick in the teeth for me, but I just sat tight. And you just see out the storm, right? So I think that's a good thing in the market. But to go back to that sort of smaller agency or almost a sort of sole trader, I think as people live in communities for longer and they become more embedded in it and there are more end users, I think actually that's when there's going to be more of a part to play for those kind of smaller firms.
Right.
Because the community matures and there's people that have lived there for longer, and that's where the connections really come through.
And who are these end users, right? As someone that grew up here, sometimes I look at these crazy numbers. I'm like, what has changed about the population demographic? Do we just have so many get-rich crypto bros, or do we have? Who are these? Are there more doctors here? Are there more educators? Who are these people?
I think there's definitely a shift to more normal middle class equivalents, right?
Yeah.
We can see in our data that there is a disproportionate amount of demand for townhouses. And I don't want to be too basic or general about it, but townhouses for me is classic housing stock of the middle class.
Yeah.
It's the working middle class. It's married, 2.4 children, right? It's not I'm loaded and I'm driving around in a Rolls and I'm traveling around the world. So not I'm young, footloose, fancy free, getting drunk every weekend at the brunches. It's that
You really hate brunches. Huh?
it's that sort of just normal middle working class people where I think they've just moved to better their life for themselves and for their kids. And I think Dubai's done an incredible job of creating lots of really attractive pull factors that bring people here, whether it's the safety, the quality of life, the tax-free income, we know it all. But it's also benefiting at the moment from a lot of push factors because it feels like the rest of the world is just losing its mind. So I do think, to answer your question, there is just a really substantial, normal, working, middle class demographic. It just doesn't capture the news as much because it's probably just not very interesting.
Yeah, because everyone talks about the FDI piece and, how, like you said, the push factors more so than the pull ones. So that's why I was just so curious because that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
I actually prefer it that way where you can see yourself, like think about cities like New York, London, etc. The fact that you can go from I'm making £10,000 a year to my family is I've educated both my kids and like we've got like whatever a car or whatever it is to go around in and like a great house to live in. That's amazing.
Correct.
To go from nothing to that, that's really the dream.
Yeah.
And I think for most people, especially migrating out of their home countries and coming here in search of a better life, etc. I think that's actually a far more compelling story than Dubai is the place where you have the super yachts and the super cars and things like that. So that's very interesting insight to take away, I think.
Yeah. I moved here when I was 43 with a wife, 2 kids, a dog, cat I can't stand.
No.
And a big driver for us doing it was, we wanted an adventure, but also because I knew what my path was back home and I didn't find it very inspiring. I didn't find it very exciting. I didn't see the market conditions improving significantly for some time, but also that just slightly depressing realization, I'm running out of runway. I don't want to be working at the pace and intensity that I am now in my 60s, like I saw a lot of my peers in London having to do because they had kids in expensive schools and big mortgages and all of that sort of thing.
It's crazy, right? And these schools are like membership clubs.
It's mental.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's mental. Yeah. And Dubai affords you that ability to, it's a cheat code, right? If you get it right, it's a financial cheat code. Yeah. And that is really attractive. And I get contacted by so many people through LinkedIn, and it is just people that just want to come over here and better their life. It's not because they want to be flash or anything like that. And they're feeling that sort of same just discontent where they are.
Better homes, better lives. Is that what we're saying?
We should steal that.
Head of marketing. Who's the head of marketing?
Yeah, let's do that.
No, but very interesting. And I'm glad that we got into the technical weeds of it. I want to come back to the person that is you, right? Which is just for all those people, like I said, looking up to you, whether you agree or not or whatever. It's just a thing. My final question to you is, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Bit of a cliched response, unfortunately, but most cliches are there because there's an element of truth to it. I would just try and enjoy, not the journey, because that sounds a bit cheesy, but just try and enjoy the moments throughout. One of the things that I need to be much better at work is telling people, well done. I'm not very good at that. And it's not because I'm not thinking it, but it's because I'm wired to think you can do better, you can do better, you can do better. And I'm very hard on myself. And I spent 20 years convincing myself that I'll be happy when I get that promotion, when I buy that flat, when I get that nice car, when I get a solid girlfriend, when I get a wife, when I get kids. It's always the next thing. And it doesn't make you any happier. And it's about just trying to enjoy those little wins along the way and just be a bit more present in the moment, because it feels like yesterday I was 23 and I'm now 45, which means it will probably be tomorrow that I'm 65 and I'm thinking, geez, it felt like only yesterday I was 45. So yeah, that's what I'd do differently.
Wow. Look, Louis, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for sharing so openly and stuff, because that's what makes these podcasts like fun, when the people on the other end are willing to talk about stuff. So
good stuff. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Pleasure.
Cool.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Come back next week for another episode of The Real Ones.